Somewhere out here in Kentucky, there are towns so quiet they didn't collapse. They simply slipped out of America's spotlight, a rusted welcome sign, a main street with more locked doors than footsteps, a church standing like the last lighthouse on a shrinking shore. Today we're turning off the highway and driving into that silence. On this map, Owen County and Henry County look like ordinary river country, but the Backroads hide 4 places with stories that don't fit their size. What happens when a town can't even find someone willing to be mayor? Why do some tiny communities refuse to disappear? 4 towns, 1 river road, and a big city contrast waiting at the end. Let's go see what's still breathing out here. Number 1, Monterey. When the backroads of northern Kentucky start narrowing and the tree line closes in, Monterey arrives almost like a rumor. There is no grand gateway, no busy intersection announcing you are somewhere special. Just a small weather-worn sign that says Monterey, a bend in the road, and a hush that feels older than the asphalt. You could drive past it without realizing you had crossed into a town at all. That is the first trick Monterey plays on you. It hides in plain sight. Pull up the map and you see how tiny the dot is, tucked in Owen County near the Kentucky River. Then the numbers land. In 1900, this place reached a peak of about 370 residents. By the 2020 census, it was down to 112. That is not a gentle decline. That is a town slowly exhaling for a century. It makes you wonder what a community looks like when it has been shrinking longer than most cities have been growing. And it makes you lean a little closer because you can feel there is a story under the silence. Monterey's strangest chapter is not about fire or flood or any single catastrophe. It is about something quieter. The state formally dissolved Monterey's city government on May 20th, 2025. The reason was almost painfully simple. Year after year, no one stepped forward to run for mayor or city council, so the town could no longer function as a city and the county had to take over. In other words, Monterey did not collapse from a disaster. It just ran out of people willing to lead it. That idea sits heavy for a moment. A town can survive storms, recessions, even wars. But what happens when it can't find a single person to raise their hand and say, "I'll do it"? Downtown is only a breath long. You roll slowly past a couple of storefronts, the kind that once promised coffee, hardware, home cooking, a haircut, a reason to linger. Now many of them are empty, their windows dark, their signs fading into the same color as the brick. An abandoned house watches the street with a porch that has not heard footsteps in years. The light rain in the air makes everything look a half shade quieter, as if the town is trying not to be noticed. You keep waiting for the center to continue, for a second block of life to appear, but the road answers with emptiness. This is the whole stage, and the actors have long since left. Here is the paradox that makes Monterey feel like a riddle. This tiny downtown, even in its worn-out calm, is listed on the National Register of Historic Places as the Monterey Historic District. 14 blocks, more than 100 contributing buildings recognized for their 19th and early 20th century character. Preservation implies an audience, a future, a reason to remember. So why preserve a downtown when almost nobody walks it anymore? The question does not accuse the place. It invites you to imagine the people who once filled these streets, and the people who might still want their story kept visible, even if the town itself is fading. If you rewind far enough, Monterey was never meant to be quiet. Before it was Monterey, it was Williamsburg, a small trading post that appeared in the early 1800s. In 1847, the Kentucky legislature established the town and renamed it to honor the Battle of Monterey from the Mexican-American War. Even the name carries an echo of motion and conflict from far away, planted here beside a slow Ohio Valley River. In the steamboat era, the Kentucky River was a lifeline, and Monterey sat in the path of water traffic and rural trade. You can almost see it if you squint. Barrels unloaded at a dock, a storekeeper calling hello, a Sunday suit stepping up to a church door, the town's heartbeat synced to the river's current. Standing here now, it is hard not to feel that layered time. You look at the river road and picture a landing that is no longer there, a general store that has become a boarded window, a Saturday that used to sound like voices. Then you look back at the present, at a place with no mayor, no council, and barely a handful of streets, and the emotion shifts. First comes the oddness, the quiet shock of learning a town can be dissolved simply because nobody wanted to sit in the front chair. Then comes nostalgia, the flicker of what once was. Finally, the stillness settles in, not as a threat, but as a kind of fragile acceptance. Monterey is not screaming for attention. It is whispering that time moves on, even in places that feel like they have stopped. As you leave Monterey, the road hugs the river again. The trees blur softly at the edges of your headlights. Behind you is a town erased on paper but stubbornly visible in wood and stone. Ahead is another dot on this silent Kentucky map, still officially a city, yet said to feel even smaller. And that promise, that the quiet might deepen, is exactly what keeps you driving. Number 2. Gratz. The road to Gratz feels like it was designed for people who already know where they're going. No billboards, no shoulder, just a ribbon of pavement slipping between trees and farm fences until the Kentucky River flashes through the gaps. Then, almost without warning, a small sign and a handful of buildings announce that you've arrived. Gratz isn't the kind of place. You enter with a sense of ceremony. You drift into it like turning a page you didn't realize was there. On the map, Gratz is a pinprick in Owen County. In numbers, it's even smaller. Around 1900, the town peaked at roughly 246 people. By 2020, it was down to 67. That drop is so steep it feels like a plot twist left half explained. Most towns shrink for a reason you can point to. Here, the reason seems to be time itself, quietly leaning on the place year after year. The effect is the same as Monterey, but the mood is different. Monterey felt like a town dissolving into silence. Gratz feels like a secret you're not supposed to find. If you rewind to the river era, Gratz wasn't born tiny. It was planned in the 1840s and sat at a stubborn, difficult stretch of the Kentucky River. Before the lock and dam system made the river easier to navigate in the 19th century, boats couldn't pass a certain point smoothly, so goods had to be hauled around the obstruction and carried overland. That awkward necessity, portaging, turned Gratz into a busy little trading hub. Picture it: wagons creaking up from the riverbank, barrels shifting hands, a ferry shuttling people across, the town's rhythm tied to water traffic and muscle. You can still feel why the streets were laid out where they were. The geography explains the past even when the past is gone. But the most gripping thing about Gratz isn't the river story, it's the post office. In a town this small, the post office was never just a place to buy stamps. It was a lifeline. It was news, money orders, letters from soldiers or sons who left for work, the weekly proof that Gratz still connected to the world. And for decades, almost an entire human lifetime, the heart of that lifeline was kept beating by women. Local records show 5 women served as Gratz postmasters across long stretches of the 1900s. One woman, Martha B. Suter, held the job for more than 30 years. Another, Charles E. Virginia Goodrich, followed for over 20. From the late 1920s until the office closed, the leadership chain was overwhelmingly female. Around 6 straight decades of women at the counter, while the rest of rural America still treated public authority as a man's seat. It's the kind of detail that doesn't sound real until you realize it is. In Gratz, the women didn't just deliver the mail, they carried the town's pulse. Standing on Main Street now, that history makes the quiet feel different. The street is only a few buildings long. There's no long row of shops, no diner glow spilling onto the sidewalk. Just modest structures, a couple of homes, and a sense that if you blink, you'll miss the center of town entirely. Blink and you're out of Gratz. Yet the place doesn't feel dead. It feels paused, like someone hit mute instead of delete. That pause gets stranger when you look at the numbers people quote about Gratz today. Some datasets report household incomes that seem too high for what your eyes see on the ground. Not poor, not struggling, just oddly out of scale for a town with this few roofs and this little traffic. And that mismatch is a story hook all on its own. Who is earning here and how? Remote work tucked into old houses? A handful of families with land or businesses elsewhere? Or maybe the data is catching echoes of a past reality that hasn't matched the street in years. The video doesn't need to answer it. It only needs to let the question sit in the viewer's lap and squirm a little. Then comes the softest kind of gut punch. The post office is gone. After 146 years of service under different names and hands, Gratz's post office shut down in February 1990, and mail started running through Owenton instead. That closure isn't just a bureaucratic detail. In a micro town, losing the post office is like losing a heartbeat monitor. The town still lives, but one of its last everyday gathering points vanished. You can almost imagine the final day. Someone turning the key, the flag coming down, a few people taking their last steps out onto the sidewalk with their letters. As you roll past the edge of Gratz, the river is right there again, calm and indifferent. You realize the town's story is not a straight line from growth to collapse. It's a loop. River trade rose and fell. Women ran the post office while the rest of the nation was still catching up. The mail stopped, but the houses stayed. Gratz didn't disappear. It just became small enough that you have to choose to notice it. And if Gratz is a whisper on the river road, the next stop is a wink, because up ahead is a town with the most suspiciously cheerful name in Kentucky. Number 3, Pleasureville. The moment the road signs start spelling out Pleasureville, your brain does a double take. After towns like Monterey and Gratz, places that feel like they're vanishing between the trees, this name lands like a wink from Kentucky itself. Pleasureville. On the map, Pleasureville sits in Henry County with a small extension into Shelby County. A neat little dot that doesn't look much different from the others. But the numbers tell a different story. While Monterey and Gratz have spent a century shrinking into whispers, Pleasureville has hovered around the 800s for decades. The 2020 census put it at 779 people. Not booming, not collapsing, just holding its ground in a way that feels stubbornly alive. That stability shifts the mood as you roll in. The air is still quiet, but it's the quiet of a town that's resting, not disappearing. Main Street comes into view with a touch more texture than the last two stops. There is a hardware store sign that looks like it has seen generations of Saturday mornings. A few older brick buildings sit shoulder to shoulder, some still in use, some waiting with locked doors and dusty windows. You pass what looks like an old depot building, one of those small-town stations that once mattered more than a skyline. The street is short but not empty. It carries a faint hum of, "We're still here." Then the name story pulls you in, and Pleasureville turns into a roller coaster of folklore. The first version is sweet and almost cinematic. Local tradition says travelers in the 1800s would come through this Dutch-settled village and remark that it was a pleasure to stay among such friendly people. One account even describes a politician passing through, hearing the men whistling and the women singing, and suggesting the village should be called Pleasureville. It's the kind of origin story that makes you smile because it feels earned by warmth. But then the second version arrives with a sideways grin. Another local tale says the post office area once sat next to a bordello, and the nickname Pleasureville stuck for reasons that don't need a long explanation. No one claims a courtroom-level truth. It's folklore, passed down the way small towns pass down everything, with a shrug, a laugh, and a maybe. And the contrast between those two stories is perfect Kentucky. One says the town was named for kindness, the other says it was named for mischief. Which story feels more Kentucky to you? If you stay with that question a beat longer, you realize why it works so well. Pleasureville's identity is balanced between innocence and edge, between church bell calm and backroad gossip. The name isn't just a punchline, it's a doorway into the personality of a place that has never quite let itself be only one thing. That complexity goes deeper when you rewind to the town's roots. Pleasureville begins long before the playful label. In 1784, a group of Low Dutch Huguenot families bought a huge stretch of land here, about 10,000 acres, from Squire Boone, Daniel Boone's brother. They built a fort for protection and held the land in common under Abraham Banda's management. The area was known as the Dutch Tract, the Low Dutch Settlement, even Bantatown, a tiny European-rooted pocket in the Kentucky hills, planted early, surviving by cooperation. When the post office arrived and named itself Pleasureville, the town eventually incorporated under that same name in 1842. So beneath today's cheeky headline of a name is a settlement story that's proud, old, and a little uncommon for rural Kentucky. The railroad era added another twist. In 1858, the Louisville and Nashville Railroad came through, but the tracks ran about a mile south of the original community. The post office and businesses shifted toward the depot in the 1870s, creating a south town, while the earlier settlement became North Pleasureville. For decades, the place lived as two halves with one name, like a small family that had drifted apart but kept waving across the yard. They didn't formally merge back together until 1962. That detail matters because it explains the layout you feel when you drive through. Pleasureville isn't one straight line of history. It's a braided one. Back on the street today, those layers are still visible if you look gently. A church rises behind tidy lawns. A few houses sit with careful porches and Halloween decorations that feel homemade in the best way. If a dog decides to sprint after your car for a second before giving up, it's not a threat. It's a reminder that this town still has routines, still has little sparks of life that don't show up in census tables. You laugh, you slow down, and the tension you carried from the vanishing towns loosens. And then as you ease toward the far end of Main Street, you notice the empty buildings again. Not a collapse, just gaps. The kind of quiet vacancy that makes you wonder what used to be there before the road got faster and the world got more online. The emotion dips slightly, not into despair, but into reflection. Pleasureville is steady, yes, but even steady towns have corners where time shows. As you leave, the name stays with you like a bright patch on a muted quilt. Pleasureville doesn't fit neatly into one mood, and that's why it works so well in this journey. It's playful and proud, warm and a little weird, alive and lightly worn. After a town that makes you grin just saying it out loud, the next stop is going to swing the feeling again. Because up ahead is a place with a courthouse that looks far too grand for its size. Number 4. New Castle. After the hush of Monterey and Gratz, the road into New Castle feels like someone gently turned the volume back up. Not loud, not busy, just steadier. You see a few more houses clustered together, a couple more cars moving with purpose, and then a sign that carries weight beyond its size. New Castle, Kentucky. On paper, it's still under 1,000 people. In 2020, the census counted 886 residents, and recent estimates keep it around the low 900s. Yet this tiny dot is the county seat of Henry County. That contrast sets the tone right away. New Castle isn't trying to vanish. It's trying to hold the center of a whole county with a population smaller than many city blocks. You can feel that roll as you roll toward downtown. The streets straighten up, the sidewalks look more intentional, and the buildings start leaning into each other like they've been doing it for a century. The rain that chased us earlier seems to soften here, turning the brick a darker, richer red. There's a quiet dignity in this place, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. It just stands there and lets you notice. Then you turn the corner, and the courthouse rises in front of you like a plot twist. For a town this small, the Henry County Courthouse looks almost audacious. Built in 1875, it sits on the courthouse square with a confident tower and layered, old-world detail. The design blends Italianate elegance with French Second Empire drama and hints of Romanesque heft in the stonework and massing. It was created by the McDonald brothers of Louisville, architects who clearly expected this building to be seen, remembered, and respected. The courthouse, jail, and warden's house were added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1977. You stand there with one question that keeps the viewer with you. Why would a town this small build something this bold? Maybe the answer is pride. Maybe it's ambition left over from a time when county seats were meant to look permanent, like a promise to the future. Or maybe Newcastle knew something that the shrinking towns didn't, that if you anchor your center in beauty, people are more likely to keep coming back to it. Whatever the reason, the courthouse doesn't feel like an old relic. It feels like the spine of Newcastle's identity. Around it, downtown fans out into a compact historic core. The courthouse is part of the Newcastle Historic Commercial District, which was itself listed on the National Register in 2016. Within a few blocks, you get the classic small county layout. Brick storefronts built shoulder to shoulder, second-floor windows that once held offices, apartments, maybe even a doctor's practice and a lawyer's sign. The district isn't huge, just a few acres and a couple dozen contributing buildings, but it's cohesive in that way only old towns can be. Nothing here is trying to look trendy. It's trying to look like itself. As the camera glides along Main Street, details start popping. Decorative cornices, tall, narrow windows, doors that have been opened by generations of hands. A small shopfront with a simple sign. A house on a side street that looks freshly cared for, right next to another that seems to be waiting for a new chapter. The mood lifts again, not into excitement but into admiration. Newcastle is the kind of place that makes you slow down without asking, and then the feeling dips in a softer direction. Because even here, where the buildings are proud, you can sense the long pressure rural towns face. The sidewalks are calm, the traffic is light. There are gaps where businesses used to be, not as ruins, but as pauses. The town's median age is higher than the national average, and incomes are modest by city standards. But none of that reads like a tragedy when you're standing in the square. It reads like a reality. The kind of reality Newcastle has been living with for decades, quietly, steadily, without drama. What hits you most is the safety of the place in the everyday sense. Not nothing ever happens, but people know each other here. It's the way porches face the street, the way the courthouse lawn feels like a communal living room, the way the town's pace gives you space to breathe. There's a quiet pride stitched into the routine. Newcastle doesn't pretend to be bigger than it is, it just refuses to apologize for being small. At this point in the trip, you start noticing how different kinds of smallness feel. Monterey felt like a town erased on paper. Gratz felt like a secret tucked beside the river. Pleasureville felt like a grin hiding a long braided history. Newcastle feels like a county's old heartbeat still thumping in a chest that's gotten smaller. Some towns fade, some just shrink and hold on. As we pull away from the courthouse and let the backroads take the wheel again, there's a sense of having crossed a threshold. We've been driving in silence for hours, listening to empty blocks, old stories, and wind through trees. Now the next turn takes us toward Louisville, where Kentucky's quiet meets its city voice. We're about to hear what this state sounds like when the road finally collides with downtown. As we pull off these silent Kentucky backroads and let the headlights fade behind us, one thing feels clear: forgotten doesn't mean finished. Monterey, Gratz, Pleasureville, Newcastle, each one is small in numbers but big in clues about how places survive, shrink, or quietly reinvent themselves. Some towns vanish on paper, some hold on through pride, and some stay upright simply because the people still choose to call them home. Now I'm curious what caught your attention most. Was it the town that lost its mayor? The river hamlet that ran on women's hands? The name that sounds like a dare? Or the courthouse too grand for its size? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. If you want more drives into America's overlooked corners, hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who loves hidden stories. Until the next road, stay curious,